Just noticed that is coming up as me. I don't know if you can change a caption.
Sorry, I missed what you said.
I just noticed that Lucy's name label is coming up as me, which might be confusing.
Okay.
Just so you know.
Can you change that, Lucy? Yeah, perfect. Okay. We have some people already here since the pre-call. Welcome, everyone. We are really delighted to have you here today in this Living with Uncertainty and Impact of Trauma webinar from the series on mental well-being. While we give everybody a few minutes to connect, I'm gonna share with you some tips. We will kindly ask you to have your mics muted during the session. Turn your camera if possible, although I think we are using a webinar format, so this is not going to be possible today for you. Only the panelists will have a face. That's because we expecting a lot of people, so maximum number of people for a meeting. So we decided to go for a webinar. You would be invited to type any kind of questions during the whole webinar, and we will try either to respond them during the panel part, or we will try to respond them after the session. Okay, so I think that's me for now. I'm going to hand over the mic to Kirsten. Kirsten is from the Fragile X Society in the UK, and she's also a Eurodius board member. She will be the lead in the board for mental health. So all yours, Kirsten, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Concha, and welcome to everybody. Thank you all for coming today to our second webinar. The theme today is Living with Uncertainty and the Impact of Trauma. We have with us researchers, clinicians, therapists, and many people who are living or have experienced rare conditions. This conversation on mental well-being is important to all of us in the rare disease community. The impact of our rare conditions on our mental health and well-being can impact us in many ways. My personal experience is through my daughter's diagnosis in life with Fragile X syndrome. We lived with uncertainty for many years before we finally had a diagnosis. This is a story many of our families share, and indeed, there are many people living with rare conditions who have no diagnosis at all and live with uncertainty all the time. Fragile X syndrome itself can also carry with it comorbidities of mental health conditions, such as depression and anxiety. Many rare conditions have mental health comorbidities, but these often go unrecognized or unsupported. There are hidden needs in our community, and it is important to recognize these and to talk about them. There has been much stigma around mental health over the years, and this stigma still exists in many of our lives, in our countries, and in our communities. Recognizing the needs of the rare disease community in the realm of mental health is complex, but ever so necessary. I was so pleased when the Eurodius board agreed to launch our mental health initiative, and now we are at the stage of forming our mental well-being partnership network. I serve as the board lead on this initiative, and I can tell you that our board is 100% behind this. It is my pleasure to introduce the speakers for today. And firstly, we're privileged to have with us Peter Carey, the president of Gaumian Europe. Gaumian Europe is an advocacy organization that supports individuals facing mental health issues. Peter is a teacher, a PR expert, and a member of the board of the European Psychiatric Association. Peter serves as the leader of the Expert by Experience pilot project established by the Awakening Foundation Hungary. His primary focus lies in addressing the involvement of patients in the social and healthcare system, as well as decision-making processes that affect them. Peter, it is a pleasure to welcome you, and we will enjoy hearing your thoughts and your speaking to us on understanding the biopsychosocial continuum and addressing intersectional needs. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Kristen. Thank you very much. It is my greatest pleasure, one of my greatest pleasures ever, being invited here, because every time when I can find connection between mental health and everybody, I feel pleasure, because sometimes persons with mental health issues believe that they are a separate area of the world, and that is my first hand what I give to you, because we can shake our hands, because not only persons living with rare diseases can feel alone, but persons with mental health issues, major mental health issues, they are separated and alone. Before I start my presentation, just in a couple of sentences, I will tell you a story. I'm a person who had a brilliant life. Brilliant, I can tell, because now I'm labeled mad. So today I can say I had a brilliant life. I loved it. I know how it is. I was 43. Till 43, I led a company. I had the fourth biggest business in my country. I was looked at like, oh my God, what is happening with this guy? Everything is so nice. And when I was 43, after the economic collapse, everything is collapsed around me. I was alone in a flat, and the flat started to talk to me. I was diagnosed with schizophrenia when I was 43. It is rare. In the rare schizophrenia diseases, it is called onset schizophrenia. About my struggles, just a couple of sentences. I want to be your friends. Hopefully, I will find friends here as well. It is not easy to deal with major mental health issues. We are hated. We are not loved. Family turns around and says that you are not the guy I loved once. You are not the guy I wanted to have. You are not the guy who led that company anymore. You are talking to the wall, and the wall has a name, and that wall talks back to you. It is abnormal. You are not like the normal population. You are unbelievable. My son, my friend, my colleague, everybody. And finally, you are alone. So it is really not a nice story until this moment. And approximately 3 years ago, I stopped psychotherapy, going to psychologist, psychiatrist, because everything went back into normal, with huge efforts in my family, with huge efforts with my friends, with huge efforts of my former social network, with huge efforts in my old society who loved me. I received back the good old Peter Carey, who they loved, who I love. So now I'm here. Last September, I was elected president of Gambian Europe, the first person diagnosed with schizophrenia here. And it is very nice being there at European Psychiatric Association, because I really believe that mental health patients, as patients everywhere, must be represented in all kind of these associations, because patient participation must be in a higher level in the future than it was in the past. And why I prepared my presentation is to figure out how we can go on our ways together, because I truly believe that our way is something what we have together. And I try to share my slides. Is it visible?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So we were talking about the aspects of our problems, if it is biological, psychological, or social, and nowadays it is usual to hear these three words together, and I believe that all are true. All are true because we live in a world where biology or body or psychology and our social network will talk to each other, we work with each other. And as I mentioned earlier, I am sure that we all can have a special physical, social, or mental condition what will not separate us anymore. It should truly connect us, because understanding something special in another person in concerning with another person is a connection, not something that can create fences. So that's why the mental health patient is talking. And I really believe that rare souls are us. I think coping with an illness that has been diagnosed as rare, incurable, or lifelong can be a huge psychological and emotional burden for those affected. The real trauma of these stamps brings with many challenges. Imagine, and I excuse me for that, but to make us closer, to create a closeness, I'd like to depict it with mental health problems, because you will see that it is so close to the rare problems of the rare disease. A person with schizophrenia goes to a hospital, receives a diagnosis from a psychiatrist, after from a psychologist, but it is another diagnosis, receives a treatment plan from a psychiatrist, but after another from psychologist. And after sure, he turns to the society, and the society says something again else, and it is awful, and turns to the family and the friends, and they will tell something else and else and else. We just don't know what to do, where to turn for, who to turn for to. And after a while, we must understand that we deal with something special, and all around us should help us to create a nicer, better way where we can function together. Because, for example, me, with a person with schizophrenia, had to understand that alone I will not be able to function anymore until I recreated my social, psychosocial network. What makes it hard? What makes it all hard for us, for those persons who are only less than, I don't know how many percent of the society, but still a valid, a valuable, absolutely whole person. The first thing is the question of hope, because after the diagnosis, many people lose hope of a desired recovery or cure. This can be a huge emotional burden. It is a huge grief and a big loss, because people often face losses associated with their illness, such as loss of physical abilities, disruption of plans and dreams, or reduced quality of life. And certainly there is mental health. People with rare, lifelong, like schizophrenia illnesses may be more prone to anxiety and depression because of the stress and uncertainty in their conditions. Social isolation. People sometimes view people with rare, incurable mental conditions differently, and people may feel isolated and excluded. Identity and self-image changes. People affected may need to reassess their identity and self-image when they receive such a diagnosis. Need for support. People with these conditions often need professional help and loving support to manage emotional distress. Some of us throughout the life, and some until that point where we can say that, okay, I found myself, I found who I am. People these diagnosis types need real support and help in coping with trauma. Empathy, the help of a psychologist or psychiatrist, and finding the supportive community can all contribute to improving psychosocial and emotional health. It's important for those affected to acknowledge and accept their own feelings and seek the help they need to deal with them. The difficulties, difficult diagnosis. Professionals have little information sometimes, or no. Symptoms often resemble those of other more common diseases, making it difficult to make a correct diagnosis, same as mental health issues. For example, a note from a person: I have consulted so many professionals, many have diagnosed me differently. I feel like I've wasted a lot of time before I know approximately what I have. Same as with the bipolar, schizophrenia, major depression. What about the treatment options? Fewer resources are available for research, development to treat these illnesses, Therefore, people affected may find it more difficult to access effective treatments. Someone said, I never thought a condition I'm experiencing could raise as many questions about treatment as mine did. For me, it's disappointing. And it is very disappointing not knowing what will be the best thing to use for the best outcome. The psychosocial burden. We can often experience psychosocial distress and isolation, as we may receive less support and understanding from those around them. I realized that my condition was not only a huge difficulty in my life, but also a very big problem for my loved ones. I did not want to cause such problems. And we feel that. We can feel that every day. We feel that until we cannot have a solution for these psychosocial problems. We can have financing problems, traumatic financing problems. We usually face high medical costs and drug prices as treatments and medicines are often specific and more expensive. Or well-being costs more for us and more for all around us. And sometimes we can feel it is caused by us. And it is horrible. Achieving health is a huge financial challenge for me. I cannot always afford not only the right medical treatments, but also a healthy lifestyle. In psychiatric institution, we always say that you must have some positive outcome. Without positive outcome, what is life for you? But if you think it over, what is positive outcome for a person with a rare disease? What is positive outcome for a person living with an incurable mental health disease? In the less common condition, it is more difficult to find a certain positive outcome. The helping environment is much smaller and more dispersed. But something else, I often feel that the maintenance of my condition itself is the positive goal in my life. And I forget what kind of life I dreamed for myself, for us, for my family, for my loved ones. And figuring out somewhere along the way, I think it is something very nice. What factors play against us? Sometimes certain stigma and prejudice. People can react negatively, distantly, even family members, loved ones. But such reactions may be the result of certain lack of knowledge, misconceptions about the illness and the mental health condition. What I myself experienced, if I talk about it, if I had the chance to say what I'm feeling, who I am, what I'm doing, what I achieved, who I was earlier, it helped. I could recreate a familiar tone in my family. I could recreate friendly tone in my social network, and I had a chance to restart. So it was wonderful. Coping mechanisms. People many times try to distance themselves from us, from many, because they find it difficult to empathize or help. They do not know how to help, knowing that I'm unable to help another person, and he or she is so different. It makes a distance in them. But I think discussion is there to open these gates, these doors. In some cultures or social settings, there is a stronger stigma, even blame, towards people with special diagnoses. If you look around, and I'm very proud that Gamia Europe created a survey in 2019. We looked around and we saw that there are absolutely imbalanced misconceptions throughout the world, and we can see it when we look at the outcomes of the special diseases. For example, it is not the same getting better if you have schizophrenia in France or if you have schizophrenia in Hungary, and that's because of some type of social blaming. But I think about that, if there is a solution or not, until all conditions, mental, rare and mental, because I think all persons who have a specific problem of the body will have a specific problem of soul. But soul is beautiful. It is there to help us to recreate us. But we must know that empathy and understanding is limited towards us. And distance and ignorance is there with prejudice and stigma. That's why I think it is very important that organizations like Gambian Europe is there looking at persons living with body diseases, illnesses of the body, and we are there understanding what kind of mental problems, what kind of problems of the soul and the heart these can cause. So joining forces and collective efforts can help people to better understand and accept both people with mental health problems and those living with rare diseases. Sharing awareness and empathy can help society to integrate these groups and create more supportive environment for us. Because if we are isolated, we are not in the environment, we cannot do anything. Finally, we will see ourselves sitting, laying down in a room, and that will fulfill our dreams, even for the whole family, but it is not nice. The opportunity to learn from each other, and that's what I can suggest, and share our own experiences and contribute to social change. And I think social change together with joint forces is what we need. Thank you very much for your attention. I promise you, we are Gambian Europe. We are with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter. There's lots of food for thought here, and it shows how complex and how many aspects there are to our physical and our mental health, that the two are often intertwined and one links to the other. But then again, there's also the social context, as you highlighted, and how we're perceived by family and friends and by wider society. So we've had some questions come through. I think we have 5 minutes actually to take some just directly for Peter, if you're happy to take some, Peter. Is that okay? So the first question in the chat was, how do I stress to my GP that I need to see a psychologist? He often does not understand or hear my struggles and pushes me in to house counseling, but I have been on a long waiting list. So do you have any advice for this question?
About GPs, it is not an easy question because, just an example, in Hungary, we created a self-help peer support online network that can be achieved via internet by everybody from all over Hungary, even from abroad, where peer support workers, persons with lived experience, you can find, they have a calendar there. And as in a flight booking system, you can book a slot for them. I visited a general practitioner in Hungary saying that, do you have problems giving advice about mental well-being for those who are in need? And he says that it is not his task. Basically, he can be kind, he can be nice, but it is not the task. I cure the disease itself. So what we created in Hungary, and if you want to join your forces, and if you have something in mind, we created this network in Hungary with the help of Gambian Europe helped a lot. It was my idea. I'm very proud that it is working. Posters are there in Hungarian GPs advertising that if you have some well-being issues, connect yourself to another person having the same well-being issues, and it is working. They have discussions via Zoom from all over, because what we can do, we can give lessons to general practitioners. I don't think anything else in this very moment. It is totally different geographically as well.
Yes, and I think Matt wants to jump in. Matt, can you unmute yourself because you had something to say?
No, I was highlighting that someone wanted to see your last slide, Peter, so I said I'll share it on the before we get to the panel discussion so they can get your details.
Yeah, and the education of health professionals and GPs is something that Lucy probably will speak to during the panel as well, because raising awareness amongst professionals that they're not only treating the specific rare condition, but they're treating the whole person. That's just such an important aspect. So we'll come to that in our panel discussion. I think that's the specific questions at this. Oh, Matt, your hand's up.
Yeah, I think, Peter, you were very eloquent about the uncertainties around which have come up around lack of treatments, lack of clarity about outcomes, the impact of isolation and impact on less support. And I just wondered, you talk about Garmian and the community of Garmian. How does Garmian as an organisation help your community reduce those uncertainties? Because I think that coming together is a big help, isn't it?
I absolutely agree. Garmian Europe is how should I say, patient-driven organization. It is a very nice word. What does it mean, patient-driven? Garmian is there for 2 decades. Today, I can say that we are really listening to patients like me and really focus on putting together what we perceive in different countries. And we are connected with partner organizations and member organizations. It means that we hear the voice of patients from many parts. It means if we have patients' voice, for example, from European Psychiatric Association, and that patient voice is totally different than what we receive from the Federation of European Psychologists, because somehow it is very different. We can connect it. I always say that Garmian Europe is like a kind, nice, warm house where we can stay together. We, like you, create webinars, materials, cooperations with different stakeholders. Like, for example, actually we have a campaign against the stigma of suicide. It is our actual project, or we try to put together something against the stigma of artists living with mental health disorder, because they are artists. But we just had an issue. We just had a nice project where we talked about how it is living together with cancer and what kind of mental health issues it will cause in the future and how it is. And I believe that these are still parts. These parts fit together. So those people who were there with us in our suicide project, they should meet in the future with those ones living with cancer. And there are still to figure out how it will be together, because we are one, I don't think. And finally, we will figure out that the society is one, because until we eliminate ourselves as patients, we remain patients. We must be people in the society, in my coat, in that red dress, in your surrounding. So we are not different, and we are different like everybody else.
Matt, did you want to jump back in at this stage? I'm aware that we probably should move on to the panel in a minute.
No, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks,
And we
Peter.
will take more questions after the panel. There's more time allowed then, but I am keen to make sure we have enough time for all of our excellent speakers to have a chance to share with us today. So I'll just go on to introducing the panel. It's being chaired by Matt, who many of you already know. Matt Boltz-Johnson is our Eurordis Mental Wellbeing Lead and Healthcare Advisor, and he's overseeing the development of our mental health initiative and the partnership network. Kim Winters is the founder and clinical director of Rare Minds, which is a specialist online counseling and psychotherapy organization in the UK just for those impacted by rare conditions. Kim has been a psychotherapist for over 25 years across the NHS, third sector, and education, and also has lived experience of rare genetic conditions in her immediate family. We also have with us Lucy Mackay, who is a UK-trained doctor and the CEO of Medics for Rare Diseases. Lucy's brother died before she was born from a rare condition. Lucy's role of CEO combines with her unique personal experiences and her medical training in order to improve the lives of those living with rare diseases throughout medical education. Lucy is also vice president of Medical Genetics Section of the Royal Society of Medicine. She's a member of the UK Rare Diseases Framework Forum and steering committee member for Medscape's Rare Diseases Learning Centre. So welcome, Lucy. And we also have with us Dorica Dan, who is vice president of Eurordis, and she's been a member of Eurordis's board of directors since 2007. Dorica is the mother of a daughter who was diagnosed with Prader-Willi syndrome at the age of 18. Dorica founded the Romanian Prader-Willi Association in 2003 and established the Romanian National Alliance for Rare Diseases in 2007. She also helped establish the Romanian Rare Cancers Association in 2011. Dorica initiated the National Plan for Rare Diseases in Romania, and in 2011 opened the Pilot Reference Center for Rare Diseases in Romania. So welcome to Dorica, to Lucy, to Kim, and it's over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Kirsten. So I think Concha, you can spot people, can't you, for the panel, if that's okay? We've got about half an hour for a panel discussion, and if there's questions which come up, please type them in the Q&A box, and we'll pick them up as part of the panel discussion. Let me just stop this. And I wanted really to start the panel discussion because this webinar is about living with uncertainty and the impact of trauma. And Peter's very eloquently talked about those aspects around uncertainty which he's faced. And I just wanted really from Dorica's perspective, you know, with the rare disease journey you've gone on and people from your community, there's a lot of uncertainties which are connected with that journey. Maybe you could highlight some of the ones which are the key ones for you.
So thank you very much for inviting me to speak today first. And the key points of the patient journeys of the patients with rare disease are searching and getting a diagnosis, which can take a long time. Then the most important moment, I think, is the announcement of diagnosis, which have a serious impact on the patient or on the entire family. Then searching for an effective treatment or cure, which also can be very tiring because most of the rare disease, as we all know, have no treatment yet. Then the transition moments from the pediatric to adult services and from the adult services to elderly people, because we know that because of the research now people are living longer, but have bring also a lot of challenges. And then transition in each step in the educational pathway from kindergarten to school, from school to high school to university, or looking for a job can be also very serious impact on their mental health. It is very challenging to create to sustain a family or an independent life. These are the most important moments, I think, in the patient pathway, or at least this is what we identified with our patient organizations. And I think the stress at these points is very important because the stress is being the psychological and physical state that results when the resources of the person are not sufficient to cope with the demands of the situation. And for the rare disease families, they are more exposed to stress than other families. And rare disease journey is associated with a high level of stress, doubts, unclear information or no information, lack of expertise or experts and resources, and a lot of challenges for the entire family, as I already mentioned. Should I continue?
I think you've summed it up really nicely, Dorica. And I'm just, you know, we've got about 81 people, over 80 people online, and I'm sure what you've said resonates with them. I think Concha's prepared a poll where we can maybe launch now to just see whether what are the three main areas of uncertainty people who are participating have faced, and would be nice just to sort of sense check that with the panel. Concha, could you launch the poll?
Sure, Matt. Yes, we do have a poll with 2 questions. The first one is based on the macro uncertainties, as to say, searching for a diagnosis, so big things that affect makes the uncertainty. And the second question will be more focused on micro uncertainties. So small things like how am I going to feel today, things like that. So I'm going to read them out loud for you. The first answer, oh, sorry, I forgot to mention, you need to highlight three. The three that in your experience, in your view, are the ones that cause more uncertainty, right? So the first one would be timing of onset of symptoms. Second one, searching for and getting a diagnosis. Third one, disease progression over time. Number 4, unclear prognosis. Number 5, mortality. 6, inherent unpredictability compromising future life planning. 7, searching for an effective treatment and cure. 8, responsiveness of treatment and or symptoms control initially and over time. And 9, transition from pediatric to adult services or from adulthood to premature aging challenges. These for main causes of macro uncertainties. And if we focus into micro uncertainties, we have as an option roller coaster of monitoring, like tests, observations, results, decision making. Number 2 is lack of communication and waiting times for appointment dates and results. Third is variable intensity of symptoms day to day, like good and bad days. 4, how to understand certain behaviors, pains, or mood, like, for example, is this condition related or is it something else? Number 5, capacity of others to understand a rare disease and its impact across salutary services, workplace, and also in personal relationships. Number 6, lack of support to coordinate care and delays in referral. 7, how to integrate the child into the community and daily life. For example, finding accessible leisure facilities and places in the community, family holidays. And 8, and last one, accessing social support and respite care with my child. And respite care. Will my child be safe? So I'm gonna give you a few more seconds.
So Concha, while people are completing that, I just would like to go to Kim really. And you know, we talk about uncertainties, and it feels like, you know, from what Peter and what Dorica highlighted, there's a myriad of uncertainties which we face. Is there a way that we can sort of conceptualize this in a better way to sort of digest it, or is it otherwise it's a bit overwhelming, isn't it?
I was just looking at that list and thinking it's not surprising that mental health issues are difficult and an issue within the rare disease community, because there is so much uncertainty that we have to deal with to different degrees and in different ways according to the nature of the condition. And I think listening to both Peter and Dorica, you've both sort of articulated really well from your own experiences how it's impacted on yourselves. One of the ways I sometimes think about uncertainty, because it's so strongly associated with anxiety and frustration, is trying to break it down into thinking about those that are avoidable uncertainties and those that are unavoidable. And this is what Lucy and I have been working a lot on with training healthcare professionals to think in those terms. You know, the macro uncertainties are often those ones that you have to, as an individual, find your way of living with over time. How you find and make sense of, you know, fears around mortality or being dependent on others, or, you know, those sort of big life issues, the big questions. What does it mean for me and my family now that this condition is part of my life? And that's a very individual journey that I think it's really helpful, even just having discussions like this, because we pick up from each other how we as individuals have made sense of that over time. So, you know, I think just these sorts of discussions are so incredibly helpful and important and supportive for mental well-being in their own right. But there's the other layer too, which I often feel we can do more about as a community, which is about raising awareness of the impact of avoidable uncertainties and how corrosive they are to emotional well-being over time. You know, just down to those things. I spoke to someone this week who said, I was actually coping really well, but I was waiting for a call from my doctor. They didn't ring, they didn't ring, they didn't ring, and then I just lost it. You know, and it's those little things that really can be understood by health and social care professionals, what a profound impact they can make in terms of mental well-being. But I think, as both Peter and Dorica have said, you know, the relationship between mental and physical health is really complex. But I think what we are really good at in the rare disease community is working with complexity. And I actually think we have an opportunity to sort of come together with mental and physical health and really think with each other how we understand at an individual and rare disease level, how do I make sense of these difficulties that this person is dealing with, and what might be the most appropriate support and help for them? Because that's going to be different for different people. Some people enjoy group work, some people enjoy talking individually, some people will want peer support, some people will need medication. So, you know, it's really thinking, how can we think quite holistically and openly about what is the most helpful support for any one individual or even any one condition. Does that answer your question, Matt? I kind of
no, it's good. I think it's you know, thinking that there are things which can be avoided, I think is a bit of a revelation. I think there's, you know, when you're thrown into a rare disease pathway, you feel a bit out of control, you know. So maybe identifying things which we can minimize and to improve our lives would you know, feels like a very good first step. And maybe we need to have that conversation with clinical services, with, you know, medics like Lucy. But I'm just wondering, Dorica and Lucy, from your side, whether you wanted to add anything around some of those avoidable situations, because Dorica, you've got the Nora Centre, and I'm sure you do stuff to support people as well. And I don't know, maybe Dorica first and then Lucy.
Yes, in fact, we created Neurocenter using an example from Frambu Resource Center in Norway. And we try to adapt to our needs, starting with our own experience, because our daughter was diagnosed when she was 18. And the first thing that the way the diagnosis was communicated to us was very bad. I wouldn't say how it was, but it was very bad and had a huge impact on ourselves. And we decided to do something to support people not to have the same experience as we had at this moment, because this is a crucial moment for all the families. So we had this opportunity to create Neurocenter, and we try to help people to accept the reality and keep their faith and hope, to try to improve their resilience, the family resilience, and to change their approach to the fact that they have a person to support in their family. And we have created, of course, we have a helpline where people are addressing for support, and we try to coordinate them and to put them in contact with services that they need, with experts that they need, and try to solve the major problem that they have. Then we are organizing in our center patient groups, where people are coming together with the same rare disease for 1 week from the entire country, and they know each other, they learn from each other, and learn how to cope with their disease and where to find support with their peers. Also, in Romania, because we have many people which are isolated in villages, we try to solve their isolation problem and the fact that they have no access to services when they need. So we try to identify in the healthcare system the right person to do case management for them and to support them, to listen to learn how to listen them and how to support them to reach out the centers of expertise or the experts that exist in our country for their disease. And we found out that community nurses could do this job with a proper training. And now for the last 2 years, we are training about 1,000 community nurses to become case managers for people affected by rare disease. And we put them in contact with the centers of expertise, but also with the family doctors at community level. And we train also community family doctors in our projects. We also try to provide therapeutic education groups for patients and therapeutic weekends for families, for the entire family, to learn how to cope with the disease, how to support their children, how to make their peers or their brothers and sisters to feel more secure if they have a brother or a sister with a rare disease, to understand more about the disease and how they can help. So we are trying to communicate our messages to the families, to the healthcare providers, but also to the community. And we work also with the schools a lot and with the teachers, where our beneficiaries from the center are integrated, and try to find solutions to the problem that they encounter in their activities. And also they can support us in our activity. So we try to make community aware about the patients with rare disease and their needs, because if they are more aware, we can find solutions together. This
Super.
is our main approach in our center.
I'm just looking at some of the, I'm going to end the poll and get it up because I think some of the areas which you were highlighting, Dorica, there really were picked up as key areas on the micro uncertainties around, you know, how a family can support an individual have good and bad days, and about that lack of control, coordination is a real minefield of uncertainty. What's happening when, trying to, the stresses of juggling those things. Having that case coordinator, I think, is something which can reduce that those uncertainties around uncoordinated care. So I think what you're doing really reflects on our good practices, which are actually addressing some of the issues which people have raised in the poll. Lucy, before I sort of go into the polls in detail, I just wondered, from your perspective, from a medic's perspective, you know, I can see that searching and getting a diagnosis is quite high, not surprisingly, in terms of one of the major causes of uncertainty, and being given a diagnosis in a bad way. Surely those types of things are avoidable as well.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, Medics for Rare Diseases, we're a charity based in the UK, but we work globally. And the idea of Medics for Rare Diseases is that a lot of what we're talking about is actually should be provided by the health services that we live in, who have a duty of care towards us. And at the moment, we know that advocacy and family and patient advocacy is behind so much of the services and support that people living with rare diseases and their families get. We should always be working in partnership. But my personal feeling is that the burden weighs far too heavily on those who are already impacted. So already, by Medics for Rare Diseases existing and saying, hey, look, no, we are for you as well. It's not just you, and how families can better, you know, what was the comment before that, how do I get my GP to understand or hear my struggles? You know, we shouldn't be in that. No one should be put in that situation. That person is paid to hear those struggles. So, and so that's what we're trying to do is educate healthcare workforces about the basics of rare disease. So I think that this comes into what Kim was saying, is that there are unmodifiable and modifiable elements to uncertainty in rare disease, and living with a rare disease, the negative impacts of living with a rare disease. Some are modifiable, you know, and some aren't. So what we want our healthcare professionals to be doing is concentrating on the modifiable, and making, you know, where you can prevent the deterioration of mental health, then do. When you can promote better mental health, then do. When you can protect someone's mental health, do it. That's your job. So rather than thinking of mental health as an area of medicine to do with therapies and treatment, a lot of the time, you know, it's different. Obviously, there's as Peter pointed out, there is a complex interplay between mental health and rare disease. But if we even just start doing the basics in modifiable parts of mental health deterioration, then I think we could make a huge difference, so that people living with rare diseases only have to deal with that unmodifiable burden. And I guess what I mean by that is, yes, the diagnostic odyssey, if it's an odyssey, that in itself is going to have a negative impact because of the amount of uncertainty that goes with it, let alone all the other things we know that go with a diagnostic odyssey. But within that, the longer you take and the more convoluted this is, the more likely you are going to come across people who don't understand your situation, don't understand you, the more likely you're going to get impacted by microaggressions, which, you know, our language around trauma because of a lack of inclusivity is so much better than it has been. And if you think about how people talk about racism and microaggressions, every time someone says to a patient or me, you know, when I was working as a doctor, oh, that person has something weird and wonderful, that's a microaggression. That's saying, you know, they're not quite a normal person. They're like, they belong in a library or in a museum. They're other. Or every time someone says, oh, you know, it's too rare, I just can't really get into it, you're not saying you're not worth it, isn't it? And all of this really takes is me and Kim talking at people for an hour and saying, no, you can't talk like that about another human being. It's as simple as that. It's about having boundaries and saying, these people are also human beings, just like Pete was saying, and Peter was saying. So I think a lot of the preventable things come down to communication, and that comes down to awareness. I believe that the vast majority of healthcare professionals go into the profession to care for people when they are in need. And when they don't, we've got to look at why they don't. Are they not being looked after? Or have they not had the training? Have they never felt this compassion? And so I think we need to, in answer to that question about my GP doesn't understand or hear my struggles and pushes me to in-house counselling, to an extent, that GP probably knows no different. You know, they probably know no different. And therefore, we can't expect them to do anything differently. So it's not the person who said it's responsibility. It's not the person who doesn't know because they haven't been trained responsibility. We have to go the level above. And just sort of one last thing, the system loves to blame the individuals, right? Because then it's that doctor or it's that nurse or that person said that. But when those people were never given any option, they were never trained in this, they were never told, we cannot expect anything different. We have to go and ask the questions of the people above. If you have a government that is asking for better healthcare professional awareness, ask what they're doing about it rather than all the individual GPs. And how are they looking after their staff? And I would just like to say, Dorica, I love what you've done here in terms of what we've produced with Nora and the importance of bringing it into the systems with those, bringing the healthcare professionals along with you and giving that training. We can't just always be nuts and bolts. At some point, we like adding things on. We've got to put rare disease integrated into every part of medicine, and mental health needs to be integrated into every part of medicine and society. And then after that, we no longer care whether, we don't need to go, it's physical, it's mental health, it's rare, it's common. We can just say it's a person and they have an array of problems or things like that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lucy. I'm going to just go to Kim. I think you wanted to add something.
I just thought Lucy was making a really important point, which I wanted to reinforce really, which is, in my experience, mental and physical healthcare professionals are sometimes very apprehensive about dipping a toe into the water of rare conditions. But actually, with very little input and training, you can really change a culture quite profoundly. And that's more rewarding for both patients and healthcare professionals. So I think it's about, not necessarily about huge, big programs. It's about sort of small change, awareness, and that actually people want to promote change. And it's very much about that, removing a separation between that's physical healthcare, that's mental health care, that's rare, that's common. It's about treating the person, you know, back to what we always say, holistic person-centered care. And I think that's what we really have an opportunity to do with rare conditions right now.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kim. I think, Peter, you want to jump in on the panel. Go on.
For one sentence.
Yeah, go on.
Just for one sentence, and to be connected with Kim and Lucy, because not only the body, the family, the soul should be connected, and mental, and I don't know, the physical, but different illness types should be connected to each other as well, because we never understand, and we don't believe that the person, even with schizophrenia, and the family member, my mother, how she lives with me, could teach someone else living with someone with an unbelievable disease. What is not schizophrenia, but we could teach it each other. And after this communication, I will truly go home to Gambia Europe's house and will initiate a cross communication like this.
Brilliant. Thank you, Peter. I've just sharing the results from the polls, and as you can see that I'd say there's 3 or 4 main ones in micro uncertainties around searching for diagnosis and getting the diagnosis, progress of the disease over time or condition, an unclear prognosis, and the unpredictable compromises around future life planning seem to all equal quite the same. I'm going to come to you, Kim, in a second. So I'm really just, you know, these are some of the key uncertainties. Are there coping mechanisms or strategies you know of which can help with this? And then for the micro ones, the key ones around how the symptoms can vary from good days to bad days, understanding certain behaviors, moods, pains relating to the condition, or is it something else? And the capacity of others to understand about the rare disease. I suppose getting that support network around you is impacted. Seems like and lack of coordinated care. Maybe Kim, we've got a couple of minutes. Is there some key advice you could give around coping mechanisms? Oh, we can't hear you. You're muted very politely.
There's a lot of different aspects to speak to there, Matt. When we're working with people from the rare disease community or healthcare professionals, the phrase we often use is growing muscles for uncertainty, growing sort of psychological muscles for coping with uncertainty. And you grow your muscles in different ways for uncertainty, in the same way that if you go to a gym and you might have different things you need to work on. It's a bit the same with your psychological well-being. And I think acknowledging that this is an important piece of emotional and psychological work when you are diagnosed with a rare condition, because the emotional work doesn't stop at diagnosis, it carries on afterwards. And this is where patient communities have a role to play. It's where healthcare professionals have a role to play. It's where organizations like Dorica do a great job of bringing people together to look at different ways of managing uncertainty. That's going to be individual and it's be collective. So I mean, a lot of managing uncertainty is about deciding or coming to terms with what you can influence and what you can't. Uncertainty is always in and of itself anxiety provoking. We don't like uncertainty because it means we may fear not coping or not being prepared for something that we fear being emotionally overwhelmed with. And often unpacking those anxieties with other people that understand takes the heat out of some of those uncertainties too. It makes them feel a bit more manageable, whether they're in the present or in the sort of future. And one of the things we often sort of use as a tip is to sort of say, just try and deal with the next thing. You know, we're very good at projectively imagining our worries into the future, and there's merit in that, you know, in being prepared. But sometimes the most important thing is to bring it back to, what do I most immediately need to attend to and deal with right now? So sort of keeping it simpler. So there's not one way of managing uncertainty, but I think keeping the conversation alive and bringing together all the different ways of dealing with it for you as an individual is what makes it possible to cope with uncertainty.
Right. Thank you very much. I'm conscious of time. I think it's a big topic area to start a discussion on, but it is only the start of a discussion on, really, in our community. So we'll continue this discussion in the mental wellbeing partnership network, which we're setting up. But we've got a bit of time for Q&A, and I think there's a few questions in the Q&A box which I think I want to ask the panel. I don't know, Concha, do you want to ask the question from the Q&A?
Sure, Mark.
Yeah.
The first one we have is from Tobias. He says the diagnosis is a life-changing moment with a traumatic potential, also for patients' relatives like parents and caregivers, that will also impact the course of the disease for the patient. Would you agree that our healthcare systems are not designed to also focus on mental health needs of secondary patients as well, and that this must be changed to a more family-centered approach?
I don't know who wants to answer that one. There's a definite nod from Kim. I can't see Lucy on there, but
I mean, yes, definitely.
Yeah.
And this is the problem we have with the way healthcare is set up, is that it's you know, it is often the carers, the other family members who are supporting the individual, but also there is a knock-on impact often to their own relationships or mental well-being. So I think, you know, this is always about designing services that support the whole family, the whole network around that individual, not just focusing on the patient.
I think we haven't, as a sibling who was never really regarded themselves as a sibling, and I think someone mentioned this in the chat, and I thought you were absolutely spot on, because my brother had already died. So you know, you don't get the support because you don't have someone who's alive. I never got the camaraderie or I didn't get to go to the the support groups or whatever, but I was there with the charity. I know how my coming into this world was weighed up, whether my parents would have me, wouldn't have me. I had carrier testing at 6, and you know, that generational trauma, and also having, you know, when someone is advocating or caring for someone else as and you're not the person who's got those obvious extra needs, then you learn to you bring it all inside yourself, because the people who are meant to meet your needs are not able to, because they're meeting someone else's needs. And this is that intergenerational trauma that is so invisible in rare disease, but it's so important from the very beginning. And we talk about this a lot. That's why the whole family needs to be looked after. That's why, you know, unburdening of families is potentially, in my humble opinion, potentially up there as just as important as treatments and cures and things, because the unseen impact on a community can be very big and people can really suffer. And that mental health impact in particular, I think is really big. I'll just lastly say, I recently spoke to a young man who's done a tour of places around the world to people with his brother's condition. His brother has outlived what was expected, and he does very well in comparison to other people with his condition. And I spoke to this young man and I said, you know, you sound like you don't think you deserve anything because you've got it lucky in comparison to other people you know. And I think as a society, as a community, we have to stop comparing ourselves. Like I've got it lucky because I've only got this part of the condition, or I've got it lucky because my brother died before I was born. And we should all just say we're all people with unmet needs who need in extraordinary situations, who need support. And I think when we all accept ourselves, what's the quote? Only when I fully accept myself can I change. And then that's when people also start getting looked after in the community as well.
Thank you, Lucy.
I just wanted to add that I agree that we need a system change, and we need to concentrate on the entire family, because the impact on the family is huge. And we need a resilient family to take care of people affected. But on the other hand, they need to keep their mental health also. Talking about siblings, parents are very concentrated on the affected child. And sometimes they are tempted to forget that the other child also needs attention. And that child could be depressed or can develop mental health problems. And it's very difficult for the families. And one of the problems, I think, or the barrier in this, is that we don't have an integrated care. In fact, we don't have these services funded as properly as we need. So we talk in our services, for instance, when we accreditate services, we talk about that we need to educate and empower parents and families and so on. And we have activities, but nobody is funding these activities. And the national authorities are not recognizing their needs, as you said. So I think we have to make more awareness around this problem in order to succeed, to have this properly organized and properly funded, in order to support families and the resilience of the families.
And Dorica, I think one of the ways to do that is to take the human rights aspect, that children have a right to education. They have a right to, everyone's got a right to a family and personal life. And we've used this, in Australia, we've used this approach for getting a diagnosis earlier, for example, in rare disease. But I think the same applies to sort of other members of the family and protecting those who don't necessarily have the condition, but their life is being impacted, taking that human rights stance and that getting people off on the right start. Generating a 1.1 billion pound drug while not looking after the basic mental health needs of the sibling, for example, we're solving one problem while creating others.
Thanks, Dorica and Lucy. Kim, you wanted to add?
I just wanted to say, I think that's a really astute point that both Lucy and Dorica are making, that we don't talk. I think we are getting better at talking about the health inequalities that are, those with rare conditions are exposed to, and those with mental health conditions are exposed to as well. And when you put those two together, I think we have a very powerful argument to say this is, the rare community is quite large, but it's also quite a marginalized community across health and social care services. And this is why these sort of forums are so important, to have a collective voice to put pressure on services and support services to change too.
Thanks, Kim. I think your comment earlier about we can have an impact on changing the culture and changing services by raising awareness, and we and it's about communication and awareness, and first, and doing that with services feels quite. It gives me hope that you think that that's an easy thing to do, as it were, because there'll be a willingness for people to adopt stuff. I think that's, for me, very, very powerful. And I always say about empowering families to cope is referral to a patient organisation. And listening to today and listening to you talk and Dorica talk, I wonder whether the clinicians know the true value and power of that referral. So when you get someone who gets a diagnosis, that if they knew that the difficulties that would go through after that, the aftermath, that actually referring to a patient organisation at that point really empowers someone for quite a long time then. And I'm just wondering about raising that awareness with the clinicians in that is a powerful tool in itself.
And I think
so.
to add to that, I think that's an absolute given, that at the very basics, every healthcare professional should know that signposting to a patient organisation in and of itself is one of the most supportive things they can do for mental well-being. Now, of course, that has to be balanced against not all that just getting thrown then at patient organisations to pick up that aspect of patient care, but it's certainly a fundamental that's a really easy thing for healthcare professionals to do. You have someone with a rare condition, you should be thinking, where's the patient organisation to signpost to?
Great. I'm conscious Kirsten, that we've come to the end of the Q&A session. We answered one question, but I think we will continue this discussion in the partnership network, and I just want for politeness make sure that we're on time for the next speaker. So thank you very much to the panel, to Lucy, to Kim and Dorica. As ever, I took loads of notes, and I'm always inspired by listening to you show me the way forward and how to improve things. So thank you very much for your contribution today.
Absolutely, yes, we definitely want to hear our last speaker. So we'd like to welcome Roseanne Schmidt. And Roseanne's going to talk to us now about the impact of living with a congenital malformation on her mental well-being of the family. Give a personal side to that. I know we each have a story, but the complexity of rare conditions is that we can learn so much from each other and from hearing others' stories. Roseanne herself is a medical psychologist at the Radboud University Medical Center, and she's a leading researcher on mental health and rare conditions, and is the coordinator of the European and Dutch platform Rare Together. So welcome, Roseanne.
Yes, thank you for the introduction. I will share my screen. Yes. Can everyone see this? Yes, okay. Yeah, so my name is Rosanne Smits. I'm based in the Netherlands, and I'm a scientific researcher, and I've been researching, or I have a project about rare conditions and mental health for over the last 3 years. My project is now finishing up, and this is actually my last week of the project, so I thought it was a really nice sort of full circle moment to be presenting one of the outcomes for you all today. So first, I will tell you something about the background of the research line. So the research line is called Common Needs in Uncommon Conditions. And the background, as you're probably all familiar, is that rare diseases are classified as rare 1 in 2,000 in Europe. But having the experience of a rare disease, we also think about people with an ultra rare disease, which is classified as 1 in 50,000 or undiagnosed, because there are similar experiences in this, especially on psychosocial outcomes. Well, I think that it's clear, also looking at the chat and all what the panelists said before, but there are several challenges in research and clinical care. So looking from a research point of view, it's very hard to make predictions because there are very small sample sizes in rare diseases. The way that a disease can manifest can be very different. There are limited insights in prognosis, which also has severe impact on everyday life, as we mentioned before. In many cases, there's no treatment available. and this is where the research line focuses on, is that there's limited insights in quality of life or in psychosocial outcomes. So there are between 6,000 and 8,000 rare diseases, which means that although each disease is rare, it's not rare to have a rare disease. So I think that also Peter stated it, that it's very helpful and useful to join forces, and that rare diseases affect 30 million European Union citizens, and that 80% of rare diseases are of genetic origin and often start in childhood, are chronic and life-threatening. So this is also why the research line focuses mainly on children, and therefore you will also get the pediatric perspective of including the family and including the whole network of a child, such as schools or other activities, which is very important in the development of a child. So development is also a big aspect in our research line. And this was also, well, very good aligned with the 2030 recommendations. So these were like a 10-year recommendations to reduce the level of psychosocial and economic vulnerability for people with a rare disease, which were published in 2020. So now 3 years ago. And for example, in this publication, it was stated that people living with a rare disease, but also their carers, experienced that they were 3 times more unhappy as the healthy population, but also, for example, that carers often spend 2 to 3 hours a day on disease-related tasks, and many more things that severely impact everyday life. So this is also where the research line stems from. And I have the research line together with Dr. Chris Verhaak. She's a clinical psychologist. I'm a scientific researcher, and I obtained my PhD in medical communication, which is also, I think, very important in rare diseases. So the the research line had several goals, but for today I will talk to you about the first goal, which was to explore psychosocial needs for care for children and families in rare disease. And we discussed many of these already, but now we'll tell you something about what the literature, the scientific literature tells us about rare diseases and mental health. So we wanted to identify the psychosocial needs in rare diseases, and we had the same aim, but with different approaches. So for example, one approach was that we just dived into the literature and looked what is there. And for the second goal, we had in-depth interviews of parents with children who have a rare disease to ask a little bit further about all the topics that we found in the literature overview. So in the literature overview, there were we have some expertise centers that we work together with, and that, for example, the clinicians also stated, yes, we're also very curious about what is written about or published about this disease and mental health. So for example, in mitochondrial disease, we found 13 articles in total, and we did this in 2020 about mental health. And this also covers quality of life, or very, very broad psychological terms about this. For DSD, for example, differences in sexual development, we only found 9 articles on mental well-being or mental health about this topic. And I thought that was very striking, because this is also a disease that is, that has a very big impact on sexual identity and development overall. And to have only 9 articles about this, I thought that was striking, but there was also in many other diseases. So to summarize, not that much. And the qualitative data, we had different diseases, for example, anorectal malformations, urogenital disease, epilepsy, no diagnosis, Turner syndrome, metabolic disease, and fetal alcohol syndrome. So those, and we spoke to the parents of children who had that disease. So in the, I just told about, so I will save you some reading, but that was the outline of the literature overview. And this is everything that was just stated in the slide. So we focused on these 6 diseases, and in every part of them, we saw like recurring topics. So for example, I will take like mitochondrial disease as an example. In mitochondrial disease, the most pronounced concerns were the need for information. It's a very complex disease also, and I think it's also very difficult how to explain this correctly. And that's also what people stated a lot, coping and communication, and how this was communicated to the patients and the parents. Practical support, so how do we coordinate this complex disease with very complex care, with a lot of healthcare professionals that are involved in care, and also a lot of concerns about inheritance. So also a little bit of uncertainty coming back. And we did this for all the different diseases. And what we found is that the need for information was a very recurring topic. So that's what we found in the literature review for rare diseases that we looked into. These are only 6 disease clusters out of the 6,000 or 8,000, but there are also a few systematic reviews, so meaning that that there are a lot of studies compared the overarching concepts in rare diseases, and that showed similar results. So that is what the literature says about psychology in rare diseases. And after that, we did an interview study to explore the need for care in pediatric patients. So with 12 parents, different diseases. And yeah, we spoke everyone over the phone, were very in-depth conversations. And I will skip through the slide because it's a lot of reading, and I will tell you a bit more. So this looks maybe a little bit very scientific, but in our research line, we really wanted to address pediatric psychology, so the development of the child and the involvement of the family, but also very important topics from rare disease. So we combined that in questions so that it really involved all the topics that are important and were already studied in rare disease. So what we found, and those are the expressed needs below, was the role of the family, which was a very important topic. And this is also in the order of frequency. So the most expressed need was the role of the family, and that there should be more attention for the whole family dynamic, but also all the sub-dynamics, for example, with the siblings, parent siblings, with the partnership in the parents. Yeah. And after that, there was dealing with uncertainty, which was also very pronounced concern. And then empathic communication. So I think, yeah, what we mentioned before is that the communication could be better. And also the communication about uncertainty could be better. For example, it's really important for healthcare professionals to address when something is uncertain, instead of patients or parents coming home and wondering about what the uncertainty is, if they didn't understood it or if it wasn't mentioned to them correctly. So it's very important to address the uncertainty. Practical support, I think that's already been mentioned as well. Information, so this will be different than dealing with uncertainty, because this uncertainty is modifiable. The information sometimes is there, but it's just not accessible for parents or patients because it's too medical, or because you cannot, when you Google something, you don't know whether it's reliable or not. So people need to be supported in knowing what is reliable information and what not. Psychological support is a very much expressed need for people, for the parents. One of the examples was a mother that had a child with anorectal malformation, and she had to do medical interventions to her own child, which was very traumatizing to her. And in that stage, she, looking back at it, she said, I really needed psychological support there. And I think it's important that during this medical time that people, the parents are expected to do medical interventions, that there is psychological support for this. And yeah, interdisciplinary care and social support, I think, is also two very important needs that were addressed. So I think these are all coming back in what we mentioned before, also what Peter said, what Dorica said, what Kim explained. But one of the topics that came back a lot, again, was uncertainty. So we found this in yeah, almost all diseases that or all interviews, because some interviews, some diseases had more parents. For example, anorectal malformations, we spoke to 3 parents who had whose child had that. And there was a lot of uncertainty again. And the uncertainty, I think also what we broke down, or what the organization very nicely broke down, is that there are different types of uncertainties. And I think it's also very good to think about this and how to address that as well. So that was a summary of what we studied, or a little bit about our research line. And I think that's, I don't know if anyone else has this, but thinking about, yeah, so what can we learn from this and what now? Because I think that the people are listening to this, they know what kind of needs they have. But I think it's very useful to have a sort of common approach for this, because we can learn then from diseases that have been receiving the money and the funding, for example, diabetes or cancer, and learn from this, and also learn from their intervention and how to use this in rare diseases. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Rosanna. It's brilliant to hear research that backs up the lived experience so many of us have. Matt, you have your hand up.
Yes, I love. I like joining the dots at the moment, and Rosanna, I had the pleasure of reading your article, and really want to build on it in our advocacy in Eurodis, and connecting really what Kim articulates, which is this need for not more mental health services, but having psychologically informed medical care. And the UN resolution, which we so love for rare diseases, highlights that member states should develop psychosocial programs for people with rare disease. I mean, for countries, how does that look? What does it look like? For me, that's about psychologically informed medical care. What does psychological medical care mean? i.e. going to a hospital, an acute hospital or a specialist centre, and building it to based on your 8 areas of common needs, you know, family focus, empathic communication, interdisciplinarity, you know. So I for me, I've had a bit of an epiphany the past few weeks with connecting Kim's narrative and recommendations and your research together with the resolution's commitment. And for me, I felt like it was a bit of a step forward. So I think I commend you on the paper. I think it's great, and it really helps to give us clarity on what needs to be addressed in those types of services for people with rare disease to meet the mental well-being needs.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we only have a couple of minutes to sum up and to give you some links about some future next steps that we're planning. So thank you, Rosanna. And Concha, are you able to put the slides up for next steps? So we're going to have to move from that one, keep going. And next one, please. Yeah, it'll be towards the end then. I mean, while we're setting this up, thank you everybody for coming along today. It's generated even more ideas. So we definitely need to have this partnership, because it's only when we have these discussions that we can tease out all the subtle differences and needs in the community. So just wanted to highlight to those of you who might not be aware that we're getting very close to launching our new Eurodis Mental Wellbeing Partnership Network. So this is the final call. And if you'd like to sign up for that and put your name forward, please do look at the Eurodis website and send in your details and express interest. So there's a whole well-being web page on the Eurodis website that actually gives you the link for joining the partnership network. It also gives links to the different things that have happened so far. So we had a big workshop at the EMM meeting in Stockholm. There's a link to the report there, I believe. There was a webinar in July, and there's a link to that and information there. There's also links to several podcasts on Rare on Air, which Kim and others have talked about mental well-being. And I believe there's also a link to the Medics for Rare Disease. If you haven't yet found that via the chat, you can find out more about that on this wellbeing page as well. There was one last question that was, who should we contact for networking? Well, one of the reasons we're launching the partnership is because we do need to network. We need to learn what the best practices are in different countries, and we need to translate those best practices into different languages. And one of the longer term goals of this partnership is to develop a mental well-being toolkit, so that we have something we can use on the ground that will help clinicians as well as researchers and families and policymakers, all of them, take into account how to incorporate and integrate mental well-being into every aspect of a rare conditions journey. So I'm trying to sum up in just a very, very few words, but a huge thank you to all of you. There's loads of information on the website. I'm sorry if we haven't gotten to all the questions, but I think the team will be in contact. And it would be lovely to see you all involved in the partnership, where we will be setting up different working groups and working on all these aspects in far more detail. So thank you ever so much for coming today, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.